Cale Vorthak stood at the viewing port of his transport ship, watching the blue and green planet grow larger through the transparent metal. Earth looked peaceful from space. White clouds moved slowly across the surface like cotton floating in water. The third planet from this system's star seemed so ordinary compared to the grand worlds of the Galactic Coalition. He checked his datapad one more time. His mission was simple enough. Visit Earth. Watch the humans. Write a report about whether they were ready to join the Coalition. Most species took hundreds of years to prove themselves worthy. The humans had only been traveling in space for a few decades. This evaluation would probably be quick. The ship's computer announced their arrival. Kyle smoothed his blue-gray skin and adjusted his formal robes. First impressions mattered in diplomatic work. He had done this job for over 60 years, visiting dozens of worlds. Most species were predictable. They either tried too hard to impress or showed off their weapons. Humans would probably be the same. The transport ship landed at a facility the humans called Sol Spaceport. Through the windows, Cale could see buildings that reached toward the sky, but were nothing compared to Coalition architecture. Small. Vehicles moved along paths between the structures. Everything looked clean but simple. A group of humans waited outside the ship. They wore matching blue uniforms and stood in neat rows. As Cale walked down the ramp, one human stepped forward. He was average height for his species, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to smile even when his mouth was serious. "Welcome to Earth," the human said in Coalition standard language. His accent was thick but understandable. "I am Ji-hoon Kim, Director of Interspecies Relations. We are honored by your visit." Kyle nodded politely. "I am Cale Vorthak, Observer. Third class of the Galactic Coalition. I am here to evaluate your species for possible membership." Ji-hoon's smile grew wider. "We understand. We have prepared many things to show you. Our cities, our culture, our technology. We hope you will find us worthy." As they walked toward the facility, Kyle noticed something odd. The humans kept looking at him with curiosity rather than fear or awe. Most species were either terrified of Coalition representatives or tried to act superior. These humans seemed genuinely interested in him as a person. "Is this your first time meeting a Vorthak?" Kyle asked. "Yes," Ji-hoon replied. "We have studied your people from Coalition databases, but seeing you in person is different. You are taller than I expected, and your skin color is beautiful." Kyle was surprised. Most species commented on his forearms or his large eyes. This human noticed aesthetic details. Strange. Inside the building, more humans waited. They introduced themselves with names that sounded musical to Cale's ears. There was Somin, who managed communications. Minho led their military forces. Hyunwoo planned their space missions. Each human seemed excited to meet him. They showed him to comfortable quarters designed specifically for his physiology. The bed was longer than human standard. The lighting could be adjusted for his eyesight. Small details that showed they had studied his needs carefully. "Tomorrow we will show you our capital city," Ji-hoon explained. "Then our space facilities, our cultural centers, our research laboratories. We want you to understand what humanity offers to the Coalition." That evening, Cale walked through the human facility. Guards followed at a respectful distance, but they seemed more like guides than watchers. The humans he passed greeted him politely. Some even attempted conversation in broken Coalition standard. He noticed animals everywhere. Small, furry creatures. that the humans called cats wandered freely through the building. Humans stopped their important work to pet these creatures or give them food. One human, a young female named Nyan, spent 10 minutes playing with a cat while explaining starship navigation to Kale. "Do these animals serve a purpose?" Kale asked. Nyan looked confused. "Purpose? They are companions, friends. They make us happy." This was new to Kale. Most coalition species kept animals for food, labor, or security. The idea of keeping creatures just for emotional comfort seemed wasteful, yet the humans clearly cared deeply for these animals. The next day began with a tour of Seoul. The city was massive, with millions of humans living in close proximity. Despite the crowding, everything was organized and clean. Humans moved efficiently through transportation systems, but they also stopped to help each other. Kyle watched an elderly human drop something, and 3 younger humans immediately helped retrieve it. "Your species seems very social," Kyle observed. "We are pack animals," Jihoon replied. "We work better together than alone." They visited museums that showed human history. Kale was disturbed by what he saw. Humans had spent most of their existence fighting each other. Wars covered their planet for thousands of years. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their entire world. Yet somehow they had moved past this violence to build peaceful societies. "How did you stop the fighting?" Kale asked. Jihoon was quiet for a moment. "We learned that our real enemies were bigger than the differences between us. Hunger, disease, the emptiness of space. When we started looking up instead of at each other, we found better ways to use our energy." At a technology center, human scientists showed Kale their achievements. Their computers were primitive compared to Coalition standard, but they worked efficiently. Their spaceships were small but well-designed. Their medical knowledge was basic, but growing rapidly. "We know we are behind other Coalition species," admitted Do-hyun, the lead engineer. "But we learn quickly. Give us time, and we will catch up." What impressed Kyle most was their attitude. These humans did not pretend to be more advanced than they were. They acknowledged their limitations honestly, while showing determination to improve. Most species either lied about their capabilities or gave up when faced with superior technology. That evening, Kyle attended a cultural performance. Humans demonstrated their music, dance, and storytelling. The art was emotional and expressive. Stories often focused on individuals who sacrificed for their communities or protected the weak. Heroes were not the strongest or smartest, but those who cared most for others. "Your stories are interesting," Kyle told Jihoon. "They focus on protecting others rather than conquering enemies." "Protection is more important than conquest," Jihoon replied. "Anyone can destroy. Creating and protecting requires real strength." On his 3rd day, Kale visited human space facilities. Their ships were smaller than Coalition vessels, but packed with efficient systems. Human crews worked together smoothly, with everyone knowing their role. They had established colonies on several worlds and mining operations in asteroid fields. "We are still learning about space," Minho, the military commander, explained. "But we adapt quickly to new environments." Kyle noticed that human military forces were organized but not aggressive. Their weapons were defensive rather than designed for conquest. When he asked about this, Minho gave a simple answer. "We fight when we must, but we prefer to build. There is already too much emptiness in space. We want to fill it with life, not add to the darkness." By his 4th day, Kale was ready to write his preliminary report. The humans were primitive, but promising. They showed remarkable social cooperation and rapid learning ability. Their emotional nature might make them unpredictable, but it also made them creative and adaptable. As he prepared to send his report to Coalition headquarters, an emergency signal interrupted his work. The transmission came from the Outer Rim, territories thousands of light years away. The message was brief and terrifying. Coalition worlds are going dark. Long-range sensors detect massive energy signatures moving toward inhabited systems. Pattern matches historical records of void swarm activity. Request immediate evacuation protocols. Kale felt his blood turn cold. The void swarm had not been seen for over 300 years. They were the nightmare that haunted Coalition history, an enemy that had never been defeated, only escaped. He looked out his window at the peaceful human city below. These people had no idea what was coming toward them from the darkness between stars. The emergency transmission played again in the human command center. Kyle watched the faces around him as the message repeated. Coalition worlds were disappearing one by one. The void swarm had returned after 3 centuries of silence. Commander. Minho stood at the center of the room, his expression calm despite the terrible news. Around him, human officers worked at their stations with quiet efficiency. Somin, the communications officer, coordinated with off-world stations. Other humans whose names Kyle was still learning managed data streams from across human space. "How many worlds have we lost contact with?" Minho asked. 17 so far, Somin replied. "The pattern is moving inward from the rim territories. At current speed, the disturbance will reach inhabited core systems in 43 days. Kyle expected panic. When the void swarm had last appeared, Coalition species had fled in terror. Entire civilizations had abandoned their homeworlds than face the approaching darkness. Yet these humans seemed almost unnaturally calm. "What are your evacuation plans?" Kyle asked. Minho looked at him with surprise. "Evacuation?" "Yes. Standard Coalition protocol when facing the void swarm is immediate evacuation of threatened worlds. Your species should begin moving your population to safe systems immediately." The humans in the room exchanged glances. Some expression passed between them that Kale could not read. It was not fear or confusion. It was something else entirely. "Observer Kale," Minho said carefully, "what exactly is this void swarm?" Kale accessed his datapad and displayed the relevant files. The void swarm is an enemy unlike any other faced by Coalition species. They appear every few centuries from unknown space. Their technology is far beyond ours. Their ships can destroy entire fleets. Their ground forces are unstoppable. No Coalition force has ever successfully engaged them in battle. Then how did the Coalition survive their previous attacks? Asked Hyun Woo, the strategic planner. By running, Kyle admitted. The swarm does not pursue fleeing populations beyond a certain distance. They take control of abandoned worlds and then disappear back into unknown space. Eventually, they leave the conquered systems empty. We return and rebuild. The humans listened to this explanation with growing disbelief. Finally, Minho spoke. "You abandon entire worlds, billions of people. The populations evacuate to safe systems," Kyle explained. "It is the only way to survive." "What about populations that cannot evacuate quickly enough?" Somin asked. "The very young, the very old, the sick?" Kyle was uncomfortable with the question. "Some losses are unavoidable. The important thing is that the species survives." The silence in the room grew heavy. The humans looked at each other with expressions Kyle could not interpret. Finally, Minho turned back to the tactical displays. "Show me everything you know about Void Swarm capabilities, tactics, and technology." For the next several hours, Kale shared 3 centuries of Coalition intelligence about their greatest enemy. The Void Swarm used ships that seemed to bend space around them. Their weapons could crack planets. Their ground forces included creatures that no Coalition species had been able to stop in direct combat. The humans absorbed this information quietly. They asked detailed questions about energy signatures, movement patterns, and attack methods, but they never asked about evacuation routes or safe systems. "Commander," Kyle finally said, "I must stress that your species cannot fight this enemy. No Coalition species has ever been able to fight them. Your only option is evacuation." Minho was studying a tactical display showing Void Swarm movement patterns. "How many Coalition species are in the threatened systems?" "Approximately 40 billion individuals across 12 species," Kyle replied. "And the Coalition plan is to abandon all of them?" "Not abandon. Evacuate what populations we can and retreat to defensible positions." "What about species that do not have enough ships for full evacuation?" Hyunwoo asked. Kyle hesitated. "Strategic triage is sometimes necessary." The expression on Minho's face changed. It was not anger exactly, but something colder. Around the room, other humans stopped their work to listen. "Strategic triage," Minho repeated slowly. "You mean you decide which species are worth saving and which are expendable?" "It is not that simple," Kyle protested. "The Coalition must preserve its strongest members to rebuild after the swarm passes. It is logical." Salmon looked up from her communication station. "Commander, I am receiving transmissions from human colonies. They are requesting permission to begin military preparations." "Granted," Minho replied without hesitation. Kyle was confused. "Military preparations for what?" "I have explained that the Void Swarm cannot be fought." "You have explained that the Coalition has never successfully fought them," Minho corrected. "That is not the same thing." "The difference is meaningless. No species has technology advanced enough to challenge the Void Swarm." "Technology is not the only factor in warfare," said a new voice. Kale turned to see a human female entering the command center. She wore a different uniform than the others, with markings that suggested scientific rather than military rank. "Observer." "KL," Minho said, "this is Dr. Nayan Park, our xenobiology specialist. She has been studying your intelligence files." Dr. Park approached the tactical display. "The Void Swarm has never faced humans before. They have never faced any species like humans." "What makes you think humans are different?" Kyle asked. "Because we do not abandon our pack," Dr. Park replied simply. Over the following days, Kyle watched human preparations with growing amazement. They did not prepare for evacuation. Instead, they prepared for war. Human colonies throughout their territory began converting civilian infrastructure for military use. Factories that produced consumer goods switched to manufacturing weapons and ship components. Mining operations increased production of strategic materials. Transport ships received armor upgrades and weapon systems. "This is madness," Kale told Ji-hoon. "You cannot fight an enemy that has defeated every Coalition species for 300 years." "We are not every Coalition species," Ji-hoon replied. "We are humans." The most disturbing part was how calm they remained. Coalition species panicked when facing the Void Swarm. These humans worked with steady determination, as if preparing to face a difficult but manageable problem. Kale sent daily reports to Coalition headquarters, describing human preparations and requesting guidance. The responses were always the same: convince the humans to evacuate immediately. But when Kyle tried to explain evacuation protocols to human leaders, they listened politely and then continued their war preparations. "Do you understand," Kale asked Minho during one briefing, "that your entire species could be wiped out? The Void Swarm has destroyed civilizations far more advanced than yours." "We understand the risk," Minho replied. "But we also understand something that the Coalition apparently does not." "What is that?" "Some things are worth dying for." Kyle stared at the human commander. In 60 years of diplomatic service, he had never encountered a species that chose certain destruction over strategic retreat. It was irrational. It was illogical. It was terrifying. On the 7th day after the first Void Swarm sighting, new reports arrived. The enemy had reached the outer edge of inhabited space. Coalition forces were evacuating 3 more systems. Billions of beings were fleeing toward Coalition core worlds. In the human command center, the response was different. Minho stood before a holographic display showing the entire galactic region. Red markers indicated Void Swarm positions. Blue markers showed Coalition worlds. Green markers showed human positions. "The evacuation routes are becoming crowded," Soman reported. "Coalition ships are struggling to move refugee populations quickly enough." "Send support," Minho ordered immediately. "Sir?" asked Yunwu. "Send our fastest ships to assist with Coalition evacuations. Protect the refugee convoys." Kyle was stunned. "You are sending your ships to help evacuate other species while refusing to evacuate yourselves?" "Yes," Minho replied as if this was obvious. "Why?" Minho turned from the display to look directly at Kyle. "Because someone has to stand and fight. If everyone runs, the swarm will eventually catch up with all of us. But your species will be destroyed. Maybe. Or maybe we will find a way to stop them. That is impossible." "The Coalition thinks it is impossible," Minho corrected. "But the Coalition has never tried." Kale realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that refused to run from the Void Swarm. A species that chose to fight an unwinnable war rather than abandon their principles. He did not know whether to admire their courage or pity their foolishness. 3 days after the human decision to fight, Kale discovered that everything he thought he knew about their species was wrong. It started when Do-hyun, the engineer he had met during his initial tour, invited him to visit a manufacturing facility. Kale expected to see the simple production lines he had observed before. Instead, he found something that challenged his understanding of human society. The factory floor was 3 times larger than it had been a week ago. New sections had been added overnight. Production lines that had been making consumer electronics were now manufacturing what appeared to be military components. The transformation was so complete that Kyle barely recognized the building. "How is this possible?" he asked Do-hyun. "This level of industrial conversion should take months." Do-hyun smiled with what Kale was beginning to recognize as typical human satisfaction with their own capabilities. "We designed our industrial systems for rapid conversion. Every civilian factory can switch to military production within 48 hours. But why? Your species has been at peace for decades." "Peace does not mean unpreparedness," Do-hyun replied. "We learned long ago that the universe is not always friendly." They walked through the facility, watching humans work with focused efficiency. The workers moved between stations with practiced ease, suggesting they had trained for this conversion many times before. "Your people have prepared for this scenario," Kyle observed. "We have prepared for many scenarios," Do-Yun confirmed. "Unknown, enemies from space, natural disasters, resource shortages, social collapse. Humans plan for problems we hope will never happen." At another station, Kale watched workers assembling components that looked familiar, yet different from Coalition technology. The designs were simpler, but appeared more robust. "Your weapons technology is less advanced than Coalition standard," Kale commented. "Less elegant," Do-Yun corrected, "but more reliable. Coalition weapons are beautiful machines that require perfect conditions to function properly. Human weapons work even when everything goes wrong." They continued to another section where humans were modifying civilian spacecraft. Transport ships designed for carrying cargo were being fitted with armor plating and weapon systems. The modifications were crude but effective. "How many ships are you converting?" Kyle asked. "All of them," Do-Yun replied simply. "Every human ship that can mount weapons is being upgraded for combat." "Even civilian vessels?" "Especially civilian vessels. The Void Swarm will not distinguish between military and civilian targets. Therefore, we will not maintain that distinction either." That afternoon, Kale visited a space dock where he met Neon, the pilot who had entertained cats during his first visit. She no longer seemed like the cheerful young woman he had met. Her manner was professional and serious as she showed him through a modified cargo ship. "This vessel carried farming equipment last week," she explained. "Now it carries missiles and defensive screens." The ship's interior had been completely reorganized. Cargo holds contained weapon systems. Passenger compartments had been converted to tactical stations. The bridge was cramped with new equipment. "This cannot be safe," Kyle protested. "These modifications appear hastily done." "Safe enough," Neon replied. "Human engineering philosophy is different from Coalition standards. We build things that work, not things that are perfect." She activated the ship's new systems for demonstration. Weapons powered up smoothly. Defensive screens activated without problems. The modifications were crude but functional. "How long did this conversion take?" Kale asked. 36 hours. We work fast when motivated." "And you trust these modifications in combat?" Neon's expression became serious. "I trust human engineering. I trust my crewmates. I trust that when the Void Swarm arrives, this ship will do its job." That evening, Kale attended a briefing with Hyunwoo, the strategic planner. The human presented battle plans that made Kale deeply uncomfortable. "Our strategy is based on Coalition intelligence about Void Swarm tactics," Hyunwoo explained. "They rely on technological superiority and shock tactics. They expect enemies to flee or surrender quickly, because that is what every enemy has done for 3 centuries, Kale pointed out. "Exactly. Which means they have never had to adapt their tactics to face prolonged resistance." Hyunwoo displayed tactical diagrams showing human defensive positions. Throughout their territory, every world, every station, every strategic location was prepared for combat. "You plan to fight them everywhere," Kale observed. "We plan to make them pay for every meter of space they take," Hyunwoo confirmed. "Even if we cannot stop them, we can learn their weaknesses and make them work for their victory. This will result in massive casualties, yes, but it will also provide intelligence that might save other species." Kale studied the battle plans with growing horror. The humans intended to sacrifice their entire civilization to gather information about the Void Swarm. It was the most coldly logical and emotionally devastating strategy he had ever encountered. "Your people have accepted this?" he asked. "Our people volunteered for this," Hyunwoo corrected. "When the choice was explained, humans across our territory asked to participate in the defense. But they understand they will likely die. They understand that death is certain if no one fights. They prefer to die fighting for something meaningful rather than live in fear." The next day, Kale visited human military facilities and discovered another disturbing truth. Their armed forces were much larger than he had been told during his initial evaluation. "You misled me about your military capabilities," he accused Minho. "We showed you what you expected to see," Minho replied. "A small defensive force appropriate for a peaceful species seeking coalition membership. But you have been preparing for major warfare. We have been preparing for survival. The universe contains many threats. The Void Swarm is only one of them." Minho showed Kyle through facilities hidden beneath civilian installations, training centers where humans practiced combat tactics, weapons development laboratories where they studied captured alien technology, strategic planning centers where they analyzed potential threats from space. "How long have you been preparing for this?" Kyle asked. "Since our first day in space," Minho replied. "Humans learned early that the galaxy is not a safe place. We prepared accordingly." At a training facility, Kale watched human soldiers practice combat techniques. They moved with efficiency and deadly grace. Their tactics emphasized teamwork and adaptability over individual strength. "Your warriors are impressive," Kyle admitted. "These are not warriors," Minho corrected. "They are teachers, engineers, farmers, artists. But when threatened, every human becomes a warrior." "How is that possible?" "Because we understand that civilization is fragile. Everything we have built can be destroyed by those who do not value what we value. So we train everyone to protect what we have created." That evening, Kale witnessed a human cultural ceremony that finally made him understand their mindset. Families gathered to say goodbye to soldiers departing for combat positions. The ceremonies were sad but not desperate. Humans seemed to accept the necessity of their sacrifice. "Are you not afraid?" Kyle asked a young soldier named Taeyang. "Of course I am afraid," Taeyang replied. "Fear keeps you alive in combat, but I am more afraid of what happens if no one stands against the darkness. The coalition will survive even if Earth falls. Will it? Or will it just run further until there is nowhere left to run?" Kyle had no answer for that question. As he watched the ceremonies, Kale realized that humans possessed something no other coalition species had: the willingness to sacrifice everything for principles that extended beyond their own survival. They would die not just for their own species, but for the idea that someone must stand against evil. It was admirable. It was terrifying. And Kale was beginning to suspect that it might actually work. The modifications to human civilization continued with breathtaking speed. Civilian infrastructure became military infrastructure. Peaceful citizens became warriors. A species that had seemed primitive and harmless revealed itself to be one of the most formidable forces Kyle had ever encountered. But they had not yet faced the Void Swarm in battle. Kale could only hope that their confidence was justified, because if they failed, their courage would only make their destruction more tragic. Yet as he watched human preparations, Kale found himself hoping for something he had never hoped for before, that the coalition had been wrong about the Void Swarm being unbeatable, because if anyone could prove them wrong, it would be these strange, stubborn, magnificent humans. The coalition retreat began exactly as predicted. 17 star systems evacuated in panic as the Void Swarm advanced. Kyle watched the exodus from the human command center, feeling sick as billions of beings fled their homes. What shocked him was the human response. "Deploy rescue squadrons to sectors 7 through 12, Commander Minho ordered calmly. Priority is civilian evacuation ships carrying Zephyrian families. "Sir," Salmon responded from her communication station. "The Zephyrians specifically requested no human assistance. They consider our species too primitive to risk their safety." "Deploy anyway. If their ships are attacked, they will need help regardless of their opinion of our capabilities." Kyle stared at the tactical display showing coalition evacuation routes. Human ships were spreading throughout the region, not to attack the advancing enemy, but to protect fleeing aliens who had insulted and dismissed them. "Why are you helping species that do not want your help?" he asked Minho. "Because they need help," Minho replied, as if this was obvious. "Personal feelings do not matter when lives are at stake." Dr. Jiwon, the medical officer, approached with a tablet full of reports. "Commander, we have received 847 requests for medical assistance from coalition ships. Many have injured passengers and insufficient medical supplies. Deploy hospital ships immediately," Minho ordered. "Coordinate with their medical protocols." "Some species have biological needs that are incompatible with human medical technology," Jiwon warned. "Then we adapt our technology. Do whatever is necessary to help them." Kale watched human medical ships launch toward the evacuation routes. Each ship carried doctors and nurses who were volunteering to risk their lives helping alien refugees. Some of those aliens belonged to species that had never shown humans any respect or friendship. "This makes no strategic sense," Kyle protested. "You are weakening your own defenses to help species that offer nothing in return." Taeyang, the cultural liaison, looked up from his station where he was coordinating refugee assistance. "Observer Kyle, do you have young in your species?" "Of course." "What would you do to protect them?" "Anything necessary." "Now imagine your young were trapped on a ship under attack, and the only help available came from a species you had never trusted. Would you want them to help or abandon your young because of political differences?" Kyle understood the point, but still struggled with the logic. "The coalition species are not your young." "Are they not?" Taeyang asked. "We are all living beings trying to survive in a hostile universe. That makes us family." This concept was alien to Kale. Coalition species maintained careful hierarchies and boundaries. Each species looked after its own interests first. The idea that biological similarities created family obligations was revolutionary. Over the following days, Kyle witnessed humans risk their lives repeatedly for alien refugees. Human rescue ships entered dangerous space to retrieve disabled coalition vessels. Human medics treated alien injuries with equipment hastily modified for non-human physiology. Human engineers repaired coalition ships using techniques their builders had never imagined. The rescued aliens' reactions varied. Some were grateful. Others were embarrassed that they needed help from a primitive species. A few were openly hostile, complaining that human assistance was inadequate. The humans treated all of them with the same patient professionalism. "How do you maintain this attitude?" Kale asked Dr. Jiwon after watching her spend 12 hours treating ungrateful hegemony refugees who complained constantly about human medical procedures. "Because that is what we do," she replied simply. "When someone is hurt, we help them. It does not matter who they are or how they treat us." "But surely there are limits to your patience. Are there limits to how much you love your children?" even when they are ungrateful or rude? Kyle was beginning to understand that humans viewed all intelligent life through this family framework. It was not logical, but it was powerful. The most dramatic example came when a Valdorian passenger ship suffered critical engine failure in contested space. The Valdorians were one of the most arrogant coalition species, known for their contempt of younger civilizations. They had specifically requested that no human ships approach their evacuation convoy. When their ship sent a distress signal, the nearest responders were 3 human vessels. The Valdorian ship is requesting immediate assistance, Soman reported. Their engine core is destabilizing. They have approximately 18 minutes before catastrophic failure. Nearest coalition ship? Minho asked. 43 minutes away. Deploy rescue ships immediately. Sir, the Valdorians have explicitly refused human assistance. They can complain about our help after we save their lives. Kyle watched the rescue operation with fascination. Human ships raced through dangerous space to reach the failing Valdorian vessel. Their engineers worked frantically to stabilize an alien engine design they had never seen before. Their pilots maneuvered through debris fields to evacuate Valdorian passengers. The operation succeeded with minutes to spare. 800 Valdorian civilians were transferred to human ships before their transport exploded. The Valdorian response was predictable. They demanded immediate transfer to coalition vessels. They complained about human ship conditions. They criticized human rescue procedures. Not one of them thanked their rescuers. The human response was equally predictable. They provided the best care possible, ignored the complaints, and politely transferred the refugees to coalition ships when safe to do so. "Are you not angry?" Kale asked Captain Sunho, who had commanded the rescue operation. "Why would I be angry?" Sunho replied. "They are frightened people who have lost their homes. Fear makes people say harsh things. They insulted your efforts and showed no gratitude." "I did not save them for gratitude. I saved them because they needed saving." This attitude extended beyond individual rescues. Kyle discovered that humans were coordinating the entire coalition evacuation effort. Their faster ships scouted safe routes. Their communications networks linked scattered refugee fleets. Their supply ships provided food and medical care to alien populations with dietary needs they barely understood. "You are managing the retreat of an entire civilization," Kale observed during a briefing with Hyunwoo. "We are helping our neighbors move to safety," Hyunwoo corrected. "It is what neighbors do. These neighbors have shown you little friendship or respect. That does not change our obligations to them. The most revealing moment came when the Centaurian Empire, the most powerful coalition species, sent a formal message to human leadership. The message was condescending and demanding, ordering humans to evacuate immediately and stop interfering with coalition evacuation procedures. Minho read the message aloud to his staff. Several humans laughed at the arrogant tone. Then Minho composed a polite response offering continued assistance and ignoring the insults completely. "Why do you tolerate such disrespect?" Kale asked. "Because respect is earned through actions, not words," Minho replied. "We will show them who we are through what we do, not through arguments about what we deserve. They may never acknowledge your contributions. Then that is their loss, not ours." Kyle was starting to understand something fundamental about human psychology. They did not help others to receive gratitude or recognition. They helped because helping was part of their identity. The response of those they helped was irrelevant to their decision to provide assistance. This created a strange paradox. The more ungrateful the aliens became, the more determined the humans seemed to prove their worth through service. It was as if insults motivated them to work harder rather than discouraging them. Your species appears to become more helpful when treated badly, Kale observed to Taeyang. We do not like to be proven right about people's bad nature, Taeyang replied. So when someone is rude or ungrateful, we work harder to bring out their better qualities. What if they have no better qualities? Everyone has better qualities. Sometimes they are just buried under fear or pain or pride. By the end of the week, human efforts had saved over 2 million alien refugees. Their ships had evacuated 30 coalition worlds. Their medical teams had treated injuries and illnesses across dozens of species. The coalition response was mixed. Some species expressed grudging gratitude. Others complained that human assistance was inadequate or inappropriate. A few demanded that humans stop interfering and focus on their own evacuation. The humans ignored all of it and continued helping. This behavior is irrational, Kale told Ji-hoon during one of their regular conversations. You gain nothing from helping species that do not appreciate your efforts. We gain the knowledge that we did what was right, Ji-hoon replied. That is enough. But the coalition may never accept you as equals. Then we will continue to help them as family. Kale realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. A species that helped others not for political gain or social recognition, but because helping was simply who they were. It was beautiful. It was maddening. And it was about to be tested by the most dangerous enemy the galaxy had ever known. The emergency session of the Coalition Council convened on the neutral station at Kepler's Rest. Representatives from 47 species gathered to debate surrender to the Void Swarm. Kyle attended as an observer, watching the proceedings with growing horror. The mood in the council chamber was one of resigned defeat. Species after species stood to speak in favor of negotiated surrender. The Centaurians argued that resistance was futile. The Valdorians claimed that survival was more important than pride. The hegemony representatives presented calculations showing that continued resistance would only increase casualties. The historical precedent is clear, announced the Centaurian ambassador. Species that submit to swarm rule survive. Those that resist are eliminated. The choice is simple. Simple for you, replied the Zephyrian delegate. Your species has colony worlds in safe sectors. Others of us have nowhere to retreat. Then you should have prepared better, the Centaurian shot back. Kale watched this exchange with disgust. These species were abandoning their principles and their weaker allies to save themselves. It was logical, but it felt wrong in ways he was still learning to understand. The human delegation sat quietly in the corner of the chamber. They had been allowed to attend only because of their rescue efforts, not because anyone valued their opinions. Minho, Ji-hoon, and 3 other human representatives listened to the debates without speaking. The humans are being unusually quiet. Kale observed to diplomat Arium, who had arrived with the human delegation. We are learning, she replied simply. Learning what? Who our real allies are. The debates continued for hours. Species after species voted in favor of surrender negotiations. The motion was nearly unanimous when something unexpected happened. Intelligence Officer Sunho entered the chamber and whispered something to Minho. The human commander's expression changed dramatically. He stood and requested permission to address the council. The chair recognizes the human representative, the Centaurian moderator said with barely concealed irritation. Honored delegates, Minho began, I have received intelligence that changes the nature of this discussion. With your Permission, I would like our xenobiologist to present her findings. Dr. Isul stepped forward carrying a data tablet. She was young for a human, but her manner was confident and professional. 3 days ago, human reconnaissance ships reached the Corvex system, which surrendered to the Void Swarm 2 weeks ago, she announced. What we found contradicts Coalition assumptions about swarm occupation policy. The chamber grew quiet. The Corvex had been one of the first species to surrender, hoping to preserve their civilization through submission. Please display your evidence, the moderator requested. The chamber's holographic systems activated, showing images from the Corvex homeworld. What Kyle saw made his blood freeze. The planet's surface was covered with organic structures that pulsed with alien life. Massive tentacled creatures moved between buildings that had been transformed into something unrecognizable. The Corvex. Population was not relocated, Dr. Isul continued. They were assimilated, absorbed into swarm biological systems. Their individual consciousness appears to have been suppressed, but their bodies and minds remain functional as extensions of the swarm collective. Shocked murmurs filled the chamber. This was not what Coalition historians had recorded about previous swarm encounters. This is impossible, the Centaurian ambassador protested. Historical records show that surrendering species were relocated to reservation worlds. Historical records show that surrendering species disappeared, Dr. Isul corrected. Coalition observers assumed they were relocated because that was preferable to imagining alternatives. She displayed more images. Corvex individuals were visible, but changed. Their bodies had been modified with organic technology. Their movements were coordinated in ways that suggested shared consciousness. They worked together with perfect efficiency, but showed no signs of individual personality or free will. The Void Swarm does not conquer civilizations, Dr. Isul explained. It absorbs them. Surrendering species become part of the swarm's collective intelligence. They survive, but only as components of a larger organism. The implications hit the chamber like a physical blow. Surrender was not survival. It was a fate arguably worse than death. How can you be certain of this interpretation? The Valdorian delegate demanded. Dr. Isul activated another display showing brain scan data. We managed to scan several assimilated Corvex from long range. Their individual neural patterns are still present but suppressed. They are conscious but unable to control their actions. They experience everything but can change nothing. The chamber erupted in debate. Some species questioned the human evidence. Others demanded to know why Coalition intelligence had missed this crucial information. A few began discussing the implications for their own surrender negotiations. The human delegation sat quietly through the chaos, waiting for the discussions to settle. Why did your species investigate this when Coalition forces did not? The Zephyrian delegate asked. Because we intended to fight regardless of what we found, Minho replied. But we thought you deserved to know what surrender actually means. And if we had not shared this intelligence? The moderator asked. Then you would have made your decisions based on incomplete information, Ariam replied. We could not allow that. Kyle studied the human faces and realized something disturbing. They had known this intelligence would end any possibility of peaceful surrender. They had known it would force other species to choose between fighting and assimilation. Yet they had shared it anyway, because they believed other species deserved the truth. The question now, Minho continued, is what the Coalition chooses to do with this information. The debates that followed were bitter and desperate. Some species still argued for surrender, claiming that assimilation was better than extinction. Others demanded immediate military response. A few suggested fleeing to other galaxies entirely. Through it all, the humans remained calm and helpful. They answered questions about their intelligence. They offered tactical advice. They provided detailed analysis of swarm capabilities and weaknesses they had identified, but they never pressured other species to fight. "You are not trying to convince us to join your resistance," the hegemony representative observed. "That is your choice to make," Jihoon replied. "We will fight regardless of what others decide. But we will not force our path on species that choose differently. Even though our choice affects your chances of success, even then. Freedom includes the right to make bad decisions." This attitude confused and frustrated many delegates. They were accustomed to political pressure and coercion in decision-making. The human willingness to respect other species' autonomy was unprecedented. As the session continued, Kyle noticed something interesting. The human delegation was observing other species' reactions carefully. They were learning which species truly valued freedom and which were willing to sacrifice others for their own safety. "You are evaluating potential allies," he realized. "We are learning who shares our values," Arium confirmed. "That information will be important in the coming conflict." By the end of the session, the coalition had split into 3 factions. Some species chose to continue fleeing to distant galaxies. Others decided to negotiate surrender despite the assimilation risk. A small group, mostly younger species with little political power, voted to join the human resistance. The vote was not binding, but it revealed the true nature of coalition unity. When faced with ultimate threat, the alliance fractured along lines of self-interest and moral courage. 17 species have chosen to fight alongside humanity, Taiyang reported to Minho as the session ended. "And the others?" 26 are fleeing to distant space. 4 are attempting surrender negotiations. Minho nodded gravely. "Then we know who we can count on." "Are you disappointed by the small number?" Kyle asked. "Disappointed but not surprised," Minho replied. "Courage is rare. We are grateful for whatever allies we have." As they left the station, Kale reflected on what he had witnessed. The humans had single-handedly changed the entire galactic response to the Void Swarm threat. They had provided crucial intelligence, respected other species' autonomy, and accepted a difficult alliance with minimal support. Most importantly, they had shown other species what the stakes really were. Not just conquest or evacuation, but the complete loss of individual consciousness and free will. "Do you regret sharing the intelligence?" Kale asked Jihoon during the return journey. "No. Everyone deserved to know the truth. Even though it made your fight much harder. Especially because it made our fight harder. If we are going to die for freedom, it should be a choice made with full knowledge of the alternatives." Kale realized that the humans had done something remarkable. They had transformed a debate about tactical retreat into a question of fundamental values. They had forced the entire galaxy to choose between convenience and principle. Many species had chosen convenience, but enough had chosen principle to give the resistance a chance. It was a slim chance, but it was more than anyone had offered the galaxy in 300 years of Void Swarm terror. Now they would discover whether courage and truth were enough to overcome the darkness between the stars. The first battle came 3 weeks after the Coalition Council session. Kyle found himself aboard the human warship Determination, embedded with a mixed crew of humans and their newfound alien allies. What he witnessed in the following hours changed his understanding of warfare forever. The enemy appeared at the edge of the Kepler system without warning. Void swarm ships emerged from what appeared to be folded space itself, their dark hulls absorbing light like hungry shadows. Even at extreme range, their presence felt wrong to Kale's senses. "Contact!" announced Lieutenant Wu Jin from the tactical station. 17 large vessels, unknown configuration. Energy signatures match swarm profile. Commander Minho studied the tactical display calmly. Around him, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. There was tension in the air, but no panic. Size. "Comparison to our vessels?" Minho asked. "Each enemy ship is approximately 4 times the mass of our largest warship," Wu Jin replied. Kale felt his heart skip several beats. 17 ships, each larger than anything humanity had built, crewed by an enemy that had never been defeated. The logical response was immediate retreat. Instead, Minho activated the communication system. "All ships, this is determination. Enemy. Contact confirmed. Implement Battle Plan 7. Protect the civilian evacuation at all costs." "Sir," interrupted Wu Jin, "our orders were to engage only if victory was possible. These odds are impossible." "Our orders were to protect the evacuation," Minho corrected. "Victory is preferable but not required." The human ships moved into defensive positions with practiced precision. Their formation was unlike anything Kale had seen in coalition tactical manuals. Instead of concentrating firepower, they spread out to create multiple angles of attack while maintaining overlapping defensive coverage. "Explain your tactical approach," Kale requested. "We are not trying to destroy all enemy ships," explained Dr. Heun, the psychological warfare specialist who had joined the bridge crew. "We are trying to delay them long enough for the civilian ships to escape. But you will be destroyed in the process. Probably. But the evacuation will succeed." Kyle watched the tactical display with growing horror and fascination. The human fleet was positioning itself to fight a battle they could not win, against an enemy they could not defeat, to protect civilians they barely knew. The void swarm ships moved forward with predatory grace. Their approach was methodical and confident, suggesting they had done this countless times before. They showed no urgency, no concern for the human defensive positions. "They act as if we pose no threat," observed Captain Donghae from the weapons station. "Because no enemy has ever posed a threat to them," Dr. Heun replied. "That arrogance is our only advantage." The first exchange of fire came at maximum range. Void swarm weapons lanced out with energies that seemed to bend space around them. Human ships scattered, their defensive screens flaring as they absorbed impacts that should have destroyed them instantly. "How are our shields holding?" Minho asked. 70% efficiency, reported Engineering Chief Kyung-min. "Their weapons are powerful but not designed for mobile targets. They expect enemies to remain stationary. Continue evasive maneuvers. Make them work for every hit." Kale watched human ships dance between enemy weapons with movements that seemed choreographed. They avoided direct confrontation while striking at the swarm vessels from unexpected angles. Their weapons were weaker, but they used them with surgical precision. "Target their sensor arrays," Minho ordered. "If we cannot destroy them, we can blind them." The battle continued for 2 hours. Human ships darted in and out of weapons range, striking at vulnerable systems and retreating before the enemy could respond effectively. They lost 3 vessels in the opening exchange, but damaged twice that number of swarm ships. What impressed Kale most was how the humans adapted during the fight. When their initial tactics proved insufficient, they changed approaches immediately. When enemy weapons proved too powerful for direct engagement, they switched to hit-and-run attacks. When their allies' ships took damage, they moved to provide cover without being ordered. Your species learns remarkably quickly, Kyle observed as he watched tactical adjustments being made in real time. We learn or we die, replied Wu Jin grimly. Today, we are learning about the Void Swarm. The most revealing moment came when the swarm ships changed their own tactics. Apparently frustrated by human mobility, they began targeting civilian evacuation, ships instead of military vessels. The human response was immediate and terrifying. All ships, weapons free, Minho announced with cold fury. Protect the civilians at all costs. What followed was unlike anything in coalition military history. Human ships abandoned all defensive caution and threw themselves directly at the enemy. They used their vessels as weapons, ramming damaged ships into swarm hulls when their guns proved insufficient. They coordinated attacks with suicidal precision, accepting certain destruction to protect transport ships full of alien refugees. This is madness, Kale protested as he watched human ships sacrifice themselves one by one. You are throwing away lives needlessly. We are not throwing away anything, Dr. Hayon replied, without taking her eyes from the tactical display. We are investing lives to protect something more valuable. What could be more valuable than human lives? The future of free will in this galaxy. Kyle watched a human destroyer ram itself into a swarm vessel 3 times its size, both ships, exploding in a burst of violent energy. The sacrifice created an opening that allowed 4 civilian ships to escape to safety. That ship contained 200 human lives, he said, and it saved 8,000 alien lives, Dr. Hayon replied. The mathematics are clear. But it was not just mathematics driving human behavior. Kyle could see something else in their actions, something that made his skin crawl with primitive fear. When the swarm threatened civilians, the humans stopped, fighting like a military force, and started fighting like an apex predator protecting its pack. Their tactics became more vicious. They targeted swarm life support systems specifically. They used damaged ships as guided missiles. They coordinated attacks with a bloodthirsty efficiency that achieved impossible results. Swarm Vessel 7 has lost life support, Wu Jin reported, with satisfaction. Vessel 12 is venting atmosphere. Vessel 4 is showing massive structural damage. How many of their ships remain combat effective? Minho asked. 9 vessels at full capacity, 4 at reduced efficiency. Kyle was stunned. The humans had reduced a superior enemy force by nearly half while suffering relatively light casualties. It should have been impossible. How are you achieving these results? He asked. Because we fight differently than they expect, Captain, Donghae explained. They are used to enemies who fight for conquest or glory. We fight for survival and protection. That makes us much more dangerous. The battle's turning point came when the swarm ships attempted to disengage. Apparently recognizing that they faced an unexpected threat, they began withdrawing toward the system's edge. The human response was immediate. All ships pursue and harass, Minho ordered. Do not let them retreat safely. Sir, our primary objective is civilian protection, Wu Jin reminded him. The evacuation is nearly complete. Our secondary objective is intelligence gathering. This is our first chance to study swarm capabilities under stress. We need that information. The pursuit phase lasted another hour. Human ships followed the retreating swarm vessels, striking at their engines and communication systems. They collected detailed sensor data on enemy capabilities and weaknesses. They observed how swarm ships behaved when threatened versus when confident. Most importantly, they proved that the Void Swarm could be hurt. When the enemy finally escaped into folded space, the human fleet had lost 7 ships and whined 400 personnel. In exchange, they had destroyed 3 swarm vessels, damaged 6 others, and saved over 40,000 civilian lives. Was the cost acceptable? Kyle asked Minho as damage reports came in. Every life lost was precious, Minho replied, but the alternative was losing all of them plus the civilians. Given those choices, yes, the cost was acceptable. And the intelligence? You gathered? Invaluable. We now know that swarm ships can be damaged by concentrated fire. Their weapons are powerful but inaccurate against mobile targets. Their tactics are rigid and predictable. Most importantly, they can be forced to retreat. Dr. Hayon looked up from her analysis station. We also learned something about their psychology. They fight like predators, not warriors. When faced with unexpected resistance, they become confused and eventually withdraw rather than adapting. What does that mean for future engagements? It means they can be beaten, she replied with a smile that made Kale's blood run cold. Not easily, and not without cost, but they can be beaten. As the human fleet regrouped and began rescue operations, Kale reflected on what he had witnessed. The humans had not just fought the Void Swarm, they had studied them, learned from them, and developed tactics to counter their advantages. More disturbing was how they had fought, not with the desperate fury of a cornered animal, but with the calculated violence of an apex predator defending its territory. They had accepted massive casualties without hesitation when protecting others, but had shown no mercy when attacking enemies who threatened the innocent. The attack on Sanctuary came without warning. Kale was reviewing battle reports when the emergency alerts began screaming through the human command center. What he learned in the next few minutes changed his understanding of what humans were, capable of when truly threatened. Sanctuary was not a military target. It was a protected world designated for non-combatant populations from across the galaxy. Over 30 million individuals from 17 different species lived there, including children, elderly, and those too fragile for evacuation to more distant systems. It had been declared neutral territory by all parties. The Void Swarm attacked it anyway. Confirmed enemy contact in the Sanctuary system, Communications Officer Soman reported, her voice tight with controlled emotion. Massive swarm fleet detected. They are not responding to surrender signals. Kyle watched the tactical display with growing horror. 47 swarm vessels surrounded the defenseless world. It was the largest enemy concentration anyone had seen since the invasion began. Estimated time until surface bombardment begins? Asked Fleet Admiral Kyungmin, who had arrived within minutes of the alert. Based on previous patterns, approximately 6 hours, replied intelligence analyst Seo Jung. They appear to be preparing for large-scale assimilation rather than simple destruction. The humans in the command center worked with deadly calm, but Kaio could sense something building beneath their professional exterior. When Dr. Hayon displayed population statistics for Sanctuary, the atmosphere in the room changed dramatically. Current population includes 4.7 million children under the age of maturity for their respective species, she reported. Approximately 2.2 million elderly individuals, 800,000 with medical conditions requiring specialized care. The silence that followed was unlike anything Kale had experienced. It was not the absence of sound, but the presence of something far more dangerous. Available response forces? Admiral Kyungmin asked. Nearest coalition fleet is 17 hours away, Tactical Officer Donghae replied. Our fastest ships can reach Sanctuary in 8 hours. Ship count and capabilities: 37 human vessels, mixed configuration, 14 allied ships from resistant species, total force approximately 1/4 the size of the enemy fleet. Under normal circumstances, such overwhelming enemy superiority would make any rescue attempt suicidal folly. But as Kale watched the humans plan their response, he realized that normal circumstances no longer applied. All available ships will deploy to Sanctuary immediately, Admiral Kyungmin announced. Prepare for emergency acceleration. Ignore safety protocols. Sir, emergency acceleration will damage ship systems and injure crews, Engineering Chief Yunwoo warned. Acceptable. Sanctuary's children do not have time for comfortable travel. The next hour was controlled chaos. Human ships across 3-star systems abandoned their current missions and raced toward Sanctuary at dangerous speeds. Allied vessels joined the improvised fleet despite having no obligation to risk themselves for alien civilians. Kale found himself aboard the flagship Righteous Fury as it pushed its engines beyond safe limits. The artificial gravity fluctuated. Life support systems strained. The ship's frame groaned under stresses it was never designed to handle. This level of acceleration will cause permanent damage to your vessels, Kyle protested to Admiral Kyungmin. Ships can be repaired or replaced, the Admiral replied without looking away from the tactical display. Children cannot, but you may arrive too late regardless. The swarm will complete their operation before you reach the system. Then we will arrive, in time to avenge them. The cold certainty in his voice made Kale's blood freeze. This was not military planning. This was the preparation of a predator that had been pushed beyond all limits of restraint. As they traveled, Kale watched the human crew prepare for battle with systematic thoroughness that bordered on ritual. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Armor was inspected for flaws. Personal effects were secured or given to comrades with requests for delivery to families. But most disturbing was how they spoke about the coming battle. There was no discussion of victory or survival. Instead, they talked about how much damage they could inflict before being destroyed. The goal is simple, weapons specialist Ariam explained to her gunner crews. Make them pay for every child they touch. Make them remember this day. Make them afraid to threaten innocence again. What if the cost is the entire fleet? Asked a young gunner. Then that is the cost, Ariam replied simply. Some things are worth any price. Kale realized that the humans had moved beyond military calculation into something much more primitive and terrifying. They were no longer fighting as soldiers following orders. They were fighting as pack predators whose young had been threatened. Approach to Sanctuary was unlike any military operation in Kale's experience. The human fleet did not attempt stealth or tactical surprise. Instead, they broadcast their intentions across all frequencies. Attention Void Swarm Vessels, Admiral Kyungmin announced. You are attacking a protected civilian population. Withdraw immediately or face the consequences. The swarm response was silence. They had never needed to communicate with inferior species before. Second warning, the Admiral continued. We are human forces responding to a threat against children under our protection. This is your final opportunity to withdraw. Again, no response. So be it, Admiral Kyungmin said quietly. Then on internal channels, all ships, you know what? They are doing to the children down there. Show them what happens when they threaten our young. What followed was the most vicious space battle in recorded galactic history. The human fleet threw itself at the swarm vessels with complete disregard for tactical doctrine or personal survival. They used every ship as a weapon, every weapon as a tool of vengeance, every tactic as an expression of protective fury. Kale watched human destroyers ram enemy cruisers. He saw fighters deliberately overload their reactors to damage swarm vessels. He witnessed captains order their ships to ram enemy formations when their weapons failed. "This is insane," he told Dr. Seo Young, who was analyzing swarm responses during the battle. "Your people are committing suicide." "No," she replied, never taking her eyes from her instruments. "They are sending a message." "What message?" "That there are consequences for threatening human young. That some species will not run or hide when children are in danger. That the universe contains predators the swarm has never imagined." The battle lasted 4 hours. The human fleet was systematically destroyed, ship by ship, until only 7 vessels remained functional. But they had achieved something impossible. They had forced the swarm to retreat before completing their assimilation operation. "Enemy vessels withdrawing," reported the surviving tactical officer. "They are leaving the system." "Casualty report?" Admiral Kyung-min asked from his position on the bridge. He was wounded but conscious. 38 ships lost or destroyed. Estimated 8,400 personnel casualty. Sanctuary ground report? Swarm ground forces eliminated. Civilian population secure. Estimated losses minimal. The silence that followed was profound. The humans had sacrificed nearly their entire fleet to save alien children they had never met. They had thrown away lives and ships and strategic resources for no gain except the protection of innocents. It was the most illogical and magnificent military action Kale had ever witnessed. Was it worth it? He asked Admiral Kyung-min as rescue. Ships arrived to evacuate survivors. "Ask me that question again," the Admiral replied, "after you have held a rescued child in your arms." The aftermath of Sanctuary revealed something that chilled Kale more than the battle itself. The human response had not been an emotional outburst or temporary madness. It had been a calculated demonstration of their protective instincts. "The swarm will remember this engagement," Dr. Seo-young explained as she compiled her analysis. "They will remember that humans respond to threats against children with unlimited violence. They will factor this into future tactical planning." "You fought this battle to establish a psychological precedent?" "We fought this battle to save children," she corrected. "But yes, we also wanted the swarm to understand what happens when they threaten innocents under human protection. And if they test that precedent again, then we will respond with even greater force." Kale realized that the humans had weaponized their own protective instincts. They had turned their love for children into a strategic deterrent. Any enemy that threatened the innocent would face not just military resistance, but the unlimited fury of an entire species that valued protecting others above their own survival. It was brilliant. It was terrifying. And it worked. Intelligence reports over the following weeks showed that swarm forces had stopped targeting civilian populations. They still attacked military targets and infrastructure, but they avoided worlds containing large numbers of children or non-combatants. "They learned," Dr. Seo-young confirmed. "The swarm now recognizes that attacking human-protected civilians will result in disproportionate retaliation. So you have successfully protected alien children by threatening to destroy anyone who harms them? We have successfully protected alien children by proving we will destroy anyone who harms them," she corrected. "The threat was never empty." 6 months after the Battle of Sanctuary, Kyle sat in his temporary office writing the most important report of his career. Through the window, he could see the rebuilt spaceport of New Geneva, where human and alien ships worked together in ways that would have been impossible before the Void Swarm crisis. The war was over, but not in the way anyone had expected. "The final statistics are remarkable," Dr. Seoyoung told him as she delivered the last intelligence summary. In 18 major engagements, human-led forces achieved tactical victory in 15. More importantly, we forced the swarm to adapt their strategy 3 times and retreat from the galaxy entirely. Kyle reviewed the numbers with amazement. A species that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries had been not just defeated, but driven away by an alliance led by beings most coalition members had considered primitive. "How do you explain the success?" he asked. "The Void Swarm made the same mistake you did," replied a familiar voice from the doorway. Kale turned to see Ji-hoon entering the office, wearing the uniform of the new Galactic Defense Coordinator. "What mistake was that?" "You underestimated what humans become when they are protecting something they love." Over the past months, Kale had watched Ji-hoon transform from a cheerful diplomatic greeter into one of the most respected military leaders in galactic history. The change was not in his personality, which remained warm and friendly, but in the scope of his responsibilities and the weight of his decisions. "Explain that to me," Kyle requested. "I have studied the battles, read the reports, interviewed the survivors. I understand the tactics and strategy, but I still do not understand how your species achieved the impossible." Ji-hoon settled into a chair across from Kale's desk. Despite everything he had been through, he still had that same gentle smile Kale remembered from their first meeting. "Do you have children, Observer Kyle?" "My species reproduces differently, but yes, I have offspring." "What would you do if something threatened them? Anything necessary to protect them, even if it meant fighting an enemy you could not defeat?" "Yes. Even if it meant sacrificing yourself?" "Yes." Now imagine that feeling, but extended to every innocent being in the galaxy. That is what it means to be human. Kyle thought about this explanation as he reviewed the war records. Human behavior had been consistent throughout the conflict. They fought hardest when protecting others, showed unlimited courage when defending the weak, and demonstrated terrifying creativity when facing enemies that threatened innocence. But the coalition contains species with similar protective instincts, he pointed out. Why were humans different? Because other species protect their own, Ji-hoon explained. Humans protect everyone. The truth of this statement was evident in the post-war galaxy. Human-led reconstruction efforts prioritized former enemies alongside allies. Human medical teams treated swarm victims regardless of their species' previous attitude toward humanity. Human engineers rebuilt infrastructure on worlds whose governments had opposed the resistance. Your people are helping rebuild Centaurian colonies, Kale observed. Despite their leaders' attempts to negotiate separate peace with the swarm, the Centaurian civilians were not responsible for their leaders' decisions, Ji-hoon replied. Children should not suffer because their parents made poor choices. This attitude extended to former swarm collaborators. When the war ended, several species that had attempted surrender found themselves abandoned by their former captors. The Void Swarm had retreated, leaving behind assimilated populations and devastated worlds. The human response was immediate humanitarian aid. You are helping people who betrayed the resistance, Kyle said. We are helping people who were betrayed by their leaders and abandoned by their enemies, Ji-hoon corrected. They need assistance more than anyone. This pattern of behavior had reshaped galactic politics. Species that had dismissed humanity as primitive now competed for human alliance and protection. The coalition government had been reorganized with human leadership in key positions. Most importantly, the concept of strategic triage had been abandoned in favor of universal protection principles. The galaxy will never be the same, Kyle observed. No, it will not, Ji-hoon agreed. And that is probably for the best. The most significant change was in how species viewed warfare itself. The human approach had proven that fighting for others was more effective than fighting for conquest or even survival. When species fought to protect rather than to gain, they discovered reserves of strength they never knew existed. We have received requests from 43 species asking for training in human military doctrine, reported veteran Commander Yunwoo as he delivered the daily briefings. They want to learn how to fight the way humans fight. What do you tell them? Kyle asked. That they cannot learn to fight like humans unless they learn to love like humans, Yunwoo replied. The tactics are secondary to the motivation. This was the fundamental lesson of the war. Human military success had not come from superior technology or brilliant strategy. It had come from their willingness to sacrifice everything for beings they barely knew, simply because those beings needed protection. The Void Swarm never understood this, Dr. Seo-young explained as she showed Kyle her final analysis reports. They studied our weapons, our ships, our tactical formations, but they never understood why we fought. And why do humans fight? Because someone has to. Because the universe is dark and dangerous and full of predators who prey on the innocent. Because if good people do not stand against evil, then evil wins by default. Kyle had seen this philosophy in action throughout the war. Human forces had taken impossible risks to protect alien civilians. They had sacrificed strategic advantages to maintain moral principles. They had chosen certain death over compromising their values. And somehow, impossibly, they had won. The other coalition species are still trying to understand how you achieved victory, Kale told Ji-hoon. Many refused to believe that pure determination was enough to defeat the Void Swarm. Determination was not enough, Ji-hoon replied. Love was enough. Determination was just how we expressed it. The distinction was crucial. Kale had witnessed many species fight with determination when threatened, but he had never seen any species fight with love for strangers, with protective fury for beings they had never met, with unlimited courage for principles that extended beyond their own survival. Your final report will be important, Ji-hoon continued. The coalition needs to understand what really happened here. They need to know that the victory was not achieved through superior firepower or clever tactics. What should I tell them? Tell them the truth. Tell them that humans are dangerous, but only to those who threaten innocence. Tell them that we will protect anyone who needs protection, even former enemies. Tell them that the universe now contains a species that considers all conscious beings to be family. Kale considered this as he returned to his report. How could he explain to coalition leadership that humanity's greatest weapon was their capacity for love? How could he make them understand that these seemingly primitive beings had revolutionized warfare by refusing to fight for themselves? The answer came to him as he watched the evening news broadcasts. Stories from across the galaxy showed human aid workers rebuilding alien cities, human doctors treating former enemy soldiers, human engineers designing defenses for worlds that had never offered friendship to Earth. In every case, when asked why they helped, the humans gave the same answer: because they needed help. I understand now, Kale told diplomat Arium during their final interview. Your species does not fight for conquest or territory or resources. You fight for the right of others to live free from fear. That is what family does, Arium replied. And we consider every conscious being in the galaxy to be family. Even those who do not consider you family in return? Especially those. They need protection most of all. This was the revelation that would reshape galactic civilization. Humans had demonstrated that unlimited protection of others was not just morally superior to self-interest, but tactically superior as well. Species that fought for others found strength they never possessed when fighting for themselves. The Coalition is already adopting human military principles, Kale observed. Protection-based tactics are being taught in military academies across the galaxy. The tactics will help, Jehun agreed, but they will only be truly effective when combined with the proper motivation. And what is the proper motivation? The understanding that every being deserves to live without fear, that children should be safe regardless of their species, that the strong have an obligation to protect the weak, not exploit them. As Kyle prepared his final report, he realized that he was documenting more than a military victory. He was recording the transformation of an entire galaxy's moral philosophy. The humans had not just defeated the Void Swarm. They had proven that compassionate species could be more dangerous than aggressive ones when properly motivated. My recommendation will be for immediate human leadership in all galactic defense matters, he told Jehun. Your species has earned the right to guide Coalition military policy. We do not want to lead, Jehun replied. We want to serve. There is a difference. Explain that difference.